Good evening. Certainly it's good to see everybody here tonight for our midweek Bible study. Appreciate so very much your attendance here. We're getting excited. We're leaving Saturday to go out of town for a week for vacation in Florida. And I'm at a point right now where I just cannot wait to get through Thursday and Friday so I can kind of get out of Dodge. You know, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, notice what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. No man can serve two masters. Well, why not, Jesus? For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Or some translations say riches, or some translations say wealth. You know, that passage really is talking about making sure that we are separate and apart from the world, right? That we aren't worldly people. But you know, that's a challenge sometimes. What does it mean to be worldly, right? I mean, we've got to live in the world. So does that mean, I'm the kind of person, I don't know if you're like me, I don't like gray, right? And I work in a highly regulated environment, so I like very clear rules. Things that are very black and white, very much a yes, very much a no. I don't do real well with gray areas. So does that mean if I'm not supposed to, be like the world, does that mean I can't have buttons like the Amish, Or I shouldn't have zippers, like the Amish? Or I should wear black? That means I'm not part of the world. I'm wearing black all the time. Or does it mean that I need to make sure I put this huge bumper sticker on my car that says, I love Jesus? That means that I'm showing everybody I'm not like the world. I'm very different. So a lot of us would like very simply, tell me what it means to be worldly. And tell me what it means to be not worldly. And let me follow this column. Make it real clear. Make it real black and white. Is it that easy? No, right? We wish that was that easy, but it's really not that easy. So how can we know if we're crossing that line? How can we know in our hearts, am I becoming a worldly person, and what exactly does that mean? Well, I want to share with you very briefly some thoughts to think about that may help you indicate whether or not you are kind of in that worldly mindset. And if you are, that you need to kind of pull back away from that. The first thing is this. Worldliness, I think, is characterized by a lack, or not really a lack, but a loss of our thirst for God. When we're not really hungry and thirsty for God. Paul wrote that his desire was Christ and Him crucified. That was number one on his list. He wanted to know God. He wanted a relationship with God. Is that the number one thing in your life? Psalm 63:1, and I can just hear from years ago the group a cappella sing this song. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water. If you're not thirsty for God, if you're not spiritually parched for God, maybe you're a little bit too close to that worldly line. The second thing to consider, worldliness is characterized by a loss of our first love. When Paul wrote the letter to the church at Ephesus, it was kind of a thriving congregation. Things were really going well. 40 years later, in the book of Revelation, in Revelation 2:4, what does John write to them through inspiration? God says, I hold this against you. You have forsaken your first love. So, is Christ our first love? If He's not our first love, that might be a sign of worldliness in our lives. Third, I think a divided heart, a conflicted heart, is a sign of worldliness. Who is first in your life? Jesus plainly said, no man can serve two masters. Are you trying to serve your career? Are you trying to serve your kids? Are you trying to serve other things other than your relationship with Christ? It's kind of interesting there in Matthew 6:24, most of our translations say you cannot serve God and mammon or riches or money. But that word in the original language is much broader than that. In fact, it really says you cannot serve God or anything that's opposed to God. So you can't serve both God and then serve things that are opposed to God. So that really opens it up, doesn't it? That makes it much broader. The fourth thing I think that helps us indicate if we're kind of flirting with the world, when you start justifying things that you once clearly said were wrong. Think about that. Think about in your own life. Are there certain things that you used to once say, won't do that, absolutely wrong, I believe that's wrong. And this is where our world really influences our thinking, doesn't it? Right? All this stuff that we see in the media, all this stuff that we see on the news at night, and things that we used to clearly say, that's just not right, all of a sudden it becomes a little bit fuzzy, right? It becomes a little bit gray in our mind. Kind of reminds me, 1924, Eric Liddell was to run in the Olympic Games. But the race was on Sunday. And he said, Sunday is the day of worship. I can't run in the Olympics if it's on Sunday. Remember when we used to say things about, I have priorities on Wednesday night, I have priorities on Sunday night, I have priorities on Sunday morning? And then it gets a little gray, right? It gets a little gray sometimes in our minds. And finally, and really I think related to this really is what I like to call brinkmanship. That's how close to the edge you can get, right? And we keep getting closer and closer. How close can I get to be like the world and not quite jump in with the world? And where we used to be way back here, over time, we've drifted closer and closer. And if we're not careful, where are we going to go? With everybody else, right over the edge. And then the fifth and final thing that I think helps us kind of indicate, am I being worldly or am I not being worldly? It has a lot to do with your priorities. What's really important? I'm thinking Chris and Jenny are in Nicaragua this week, right? And, people down there, they're just thirsty for the gospel of Christ. I remember when I went to Haiti several years ago, these people would walk hours to go to church in the dark, and they would sit for hours for a worship service, and they weren't in padded pews kind of thing, right? And so sometimes I wonder, where are our priorities? Let me give you for instance, and this may indict some of us. Yesterday I had an employee who came up to me. She's a nurse practitioner, and she looked awful. She just looked awful. She was sick. She needed to go home. And she goes, oh man, I just feel so sick. And I said, you need to really go home. She goes, well, I'm going to try to make it into work tomorrow. But how many of us, if we have a slight cough or a slight sniffle, we go, well, I better not go to church tonight. Might get somebody sick. But we'll go to work when we're sicker than a dog, right? Right? And all of our coworkers too, right? They'll come to work, they're sick as a dog. I can't miss work. Even though I've got vacation, I don't want to use my vacation time because that's sacred, right? But it's like, oh yeah, I'm not feeling so good. I think I'll just stay home tonight and watch the game, right? So where are our priorities? I'm not here to put a guilt trip on anybody. I'm just here to say, when you think about being a Christian, it is really hard in a very secular world. As you know, there was a time, maybe 50, 60 years ago, and some of you can remember that time, when our culture was supportive of Christian principles, right? It's not so much that way anymore. And quite honestly, I worry about my children and maybe one day grandchildren, the kind of world they're going to live in that's going to be very antagonistic to Christianity. And so I better get my act together when? Now. And clearly define what is worldly and what is not worldly. And I know it's not real easy. It's not a yes and a no. It's not a black and a white. But hopefully these are some principles that can kind of guide you and give you an idea, am I on that edge? And if I am, I don't want to be there. And so tonight I want to encourage you, first of all, if you're not a New Testament Christian, to name the name of Christ, to be immersed in water, to have your sins washed away, to get out of the world, to come into Christ, and let this Christian family walk with you to help keep you where you need to be. Let me tell you something. I want to commend every one of you for being in the walls of this auditorium tonight. This is a step you have taken to say, I need an energy boost. I need to be charged up so I don't become so much like all those people that I'm around all the time. I like them, but a lot of times they use language I don't like. They tell stories I don't like. And the more I'm around them, guess what? The more it rubs off, right? And so I need this energy boost. And so I want to commend all of you for being here tonight. Because some folks didn't come here tonight. You came here because you're committed and you want to be different from everybody else. Perhaps you are a Christian, but you look at your life and you realize, I need prayers because I really struggle. I struggle with wanting to be like the world and wanting to be in the in crowd and wanting to laugh at the jokes and wanting to be like everybody else. It's not easy. Jesus never said it would be easy, right? But He's with you, we're with you, and if we can pray for you and help you in any way, won't you? Please come forward while together we stand and sing to encourage you.